Shalom, or Boker Tov, which is good morning in Hebrew. Today I am going to be making some basic bread with fresh milled flour. This actually comes from the Fresh Milled Mama website. It's really based on, it's almost exactly like the Breadbecker's website, basic bread recipe. But I've found it's really light and fluffy, and my family actually likes it. When you switch to fresh milled, it's going to be very different than just using store-bought flour. And so I've had to adjust with the recipes that I use. So this recipe works really well. I basically have to make it every single day at this point. We go through about a loaf a day if I just let the kids eat whatever they want after breakfast, and we, have our toast with breakfast. So this is leftover from yesterday. I try not to leave a lot of fresh milled flour around because it does lose its nutrients after a while. So we're gonna go ahead and mill up some flour, and we need 5 cups of this to make 1 loaf of bread. This is the Nutri-Mill, and I love it. The reason I got it was twofold, maybe 3. Number 1, it has actual stones that it uses to grind, and it's not metal blades. So I really appreciated that. The second thing I really appreciated is that it is a lot quieter than some of the other ones out there. And you won't believe me when you hear it, but it is actually quieter. And then thirdly, what I really liked about it is that you can adjust the grind on it. The grind can go from super fine, like powder, all the way up to coarse grind for like chicken feed or whatever you're wanting to do. So anyway, this is going to be a grind that's very similar to what you would get at the store. And so I'm going to grind up 5 cups here. Post below if you have any questions about the Nutri-Mill. I'll actually try to put a link to where I got this, and I would totally buy it again if given the opportunity. So one thing I want to mention is that for breads that rise, and we're talking not quick breads that you use baking powder or baking soda, not pastries, we're talking about yeast type breads, you're going to use a hard white flour or hard red berry. And actually this might be a good time to show you. These are wheat berries. This is what it looks like before it's ground. And these are hard white. I do that because it actually looks a lot like a wheat bread once you do it, because we're not processing it like you do in the store, the store-bought flour. It's not being processed. You can sift it at home and make it into an all-purpose where it doesn't have the hull and the bran in it, but I like to keep it whole, and the hard white works really well for that. But again, you use the hard, not the soft. The soft is going to be for your quick breads that you use baking powder, baking soda for, as well as your pastries. That's your soft white. And the reason is that hard white naturally has more gluten in it, and so it's going to help get that glutinous stretch to it. It'll help with the window painting when you're making sourdough. So that's what the hard white is good for. Again, I could use a hard red. I think there are a couple other, there are many different kinds of grains, but the hard white is what I use. So here we go. Okay, we're all ground. We have, well, I'll probably actually have to grind up a little bit more, but let's start with this and see how it goes. Okay, so I'm going to actually use a technique that has been used for probably thousands of years, and I need to go stir my eggs. Just a minute. Anyway, so I'm going to use a technique that's been used probably for thousands of years, and that's instead of doing stuff in separate bowls or using my hand mixer, or my KitchenAid stand mixer, either one, I'm going to use my hands and I'm going to use one bowl. And I like this because I don't like doing dishes. I go ahead, I leave on some of my rings. I take off the ones that have like holes and stuff in them, but I'm prone to losing my rings, so. Okay, so what you do with this method is you put in all the dry ingredients first, and then you make a well in the middle. You put all the wet ingredients in the middle, and then you mix them together. And it actually works really well. Even though this is a yeast bread, I'm still able to bloom the yeast, and it works just fine. So these are all my ingredients here. My daughter set them out so nicely. She's actually behind the camera. Charlotte's my 14-year-old, and she has been encouraging me to do this, as have the ladies in my congregation. They've been so sweet in wanting to see some of the recipes that I make. So this is for them. That's 3. I don't know that we'll get to the 5. 4, because I also need extra for when I'm kneading. So I'll probably grind up a little bit more. Oh, we might have enough. A little bit more for when I'm kneading. That might be exactly what I need. So we'll start with that. Okay, so I have my flour, and
No
I'm
pun
just gonna
intended.
make, huh?
No pun intended.
No pun intended. What did I say?
You said that's what we'll need for kneading.
Oh, right. So here we go. So now I'm making my well here. That's where all of the wet ingredients are gonna go. And then we're gonna bloom our yeast. So we're gonna get some warm water. And I just use tap water at pretty much its hottest. You don't wanna kill the yeast with the water being too hot. And if you wanna use the technique that moms use for babies, if you run it over your wrist, it's a lot more responsive. Like you're able to actually tell what the temperature is. All right, so I think this recipe is 1.5 cups of water. I'm gonna double check that before I pour this in. Yeah, 1.5 cups of warm water. And this recipe says at 110 degrees. I'm not gonna measure it because I pretty much know that's a nice warmth. It'll bloom the yeast just fine, and then we will mix it up. So there's our 1.5 cups of warm water. Then we're gonna add 1/3 cup of olive oil and 1/3 cup of honey. And one of the tricks my mom taught me was that you always measure in the oil first and then the honey, because then the honey comes out really easily versus, you know, putting the honey in first and then the oil. So I may need, well, I think I'm gonna have just enough honey too. Okay. And this is actually a pretty sweet bread. If you go to the Breadbecker's website, this is her all-purpose bread for just about everything, and she makes it into cinnamon rolls. She makes it into like a cinnamon raisin bread. She makes it into dinner rolls. It's just her standard recipe that she uses. So if you like bread that's a little less sweet, you can always cut back on the sweetener. That's your choice. So there's the olive oil, the honey, and the water. Now, last but not least, we're gonna put in the yeast. And we're just gonna put in 1 tablespoon. And it takes about 5 minutes for yeast to bloom. And all that's doing is you're activating it. And the reason they call it blooming, and you'll see, I'm just sprinkling it over the top, and then I'm gonna gently mix it into the wet. You'll see that when it activates, it actually kind of looks like, well, it kind of looks like mold actually as it like comes up. It looks like it's blooming like a flower. So anyway, let me grab a fork. I'm going to very gently mix this into the wet. And Charlotte, if you want to come over here and show them what it looks like. So right now, this is the yeast sitting on top. I'm just going to gently kind of mix in the honey. The honey tends to go to the very bottom. Just try not to mix in the flour because the flour doesn't need to be mixed in right now. We need the sugar mixture for the yeast to bloom. And so now we're just going to wait. We're going to set the timer for 5 minutes. Okay, so our yeast has bloomed. Wasn't it beautiful? Actually, my 10-year-old thinks it looks creepy, but it is a little creepy. But anyway, so it's fully bloomed now and maybe a little overbloomed at the moment. But one thing I did want to mention is that when you get a yeast, keep it in a cool, dry place. I actually keep mine in the freezer, and because of that, it takes it a little longer to bloom sometimes than maybe your average yeast would. But that's to keep it longer. If you notice, we have lights under the cabinets, and for a while I had been keeping it on the bottom shelf of my cabinet, and one day I opened up, I had a bag of yeast. I opened up the bag and it smelled rotten. I had never smelled rotten yeast before, and I put 2 and 2 together and realized it had been hot and it had ruined it, it had killed it, and so it was dead and it did not smell good. So whenever you use your yeast, make sure you open it and you smell it and you make sure that it smells yeasty or not rotten, if nothing else. And then keep it in either the refrigerator or the freezer and just watch it sight-wise. So much of baking is actually, or at least bread baking, is actually, doing it often enough that you know what you're looking for. And so when things go wrong and you see something that doesn't look right, you're able to adjust. That's something actually I was teaching my girls, is that one of the biggest things, I'm gonna actually go ahead and start mixing in while I'm talking. So if she wants to take it, that way you guys can watch me mix it in. So I'm doing kind of a claw motion. I'm scraping the sides and then I turn with my other hand. And one of the keys is don't use both hands. Because then you don't have a dry hand that you can use to add flour or turn the dough. So let's see, what was I saying? What was I saying before that?
I don't know. What were you saying?
Okay, so I couldn't remember what I was talking about right before I started mixing. But with my girls, I did talk to them about one of the biggest things with baking or cooking or sewing, or probably any type of endeavor, is one of your biggest provers. One of the things that prove you as a baker or as a gardener or as a seamstress is being able to solve issues as they arise, because there will always be issues that come up with baking. Things don't always work the same. Like my recipe here in Tennessee, where it's really hot and really humid, may not work the same as you doing this exact same recipe in, say, Colorado, where it's cooler and it is a lot drier, like a lot drier. So that has been something I've had to adjust to as well. We actually moved here from Colorado about 3 or 4 years ago, and I cooked there as well. I baked there as well. I did not start my serious bread baking journey until I got here, but even baked goods cooked up a lot differently than they do here, because it was also high altitude. And this, where we are in Tennessee, this is like, I think it's like 2,500 feet above sea level, and Colorado, Denver area was like 57, 82 above sea level. So anyway, so this dough is coming together really nicely. If you notice, I am, hold on, I'm just pulling some stuff off my hand. I am turning and kneading in the bowl. And at some point, I mean, if you want, you can turn it out onto the countertop if you'd like. But I knead it in here usually. I'm tall, and so I'm able to kind of get above the dough. You want to be above the dough, because if you're not above the dough, your arm and your back is going to get really tired. When my littles are down here and they're trying to push it, it's really hard for them. They're like, my arms are so tired, and it's because they just aren't up above it. So I have to put them on a step stool so they can be up above it and knead it. So what you're doing is, the recipe actually calls for this to be kneaded until smooth and elastic, about 5 to 6 minutes. But they are assuming that you are working with a stand mixer with a dough hook. So that is probably gonna be double for what you're doing by hand. And I don't know exactly, I don't know that, so it's kind of weird. I would rather knead dough than I would wash my stand mixer. So because of that, I'm okay spending, 10 minutes kneading dough versus 10 minutes washing my stand mixer. Kneading dough for me is therapeutic, I guess, and it makes me happy to see it come together. So what you're wanting to do is, so you can do this in a stand mixer is my point, but I like doing it in a bowl. And they actually have bread bowls. I was learning about this the other day, and many of you probably already know this if you're watching this, but they used to make bread bowls out of wood. Obviously, that's all they had, really. But they were so beautiful. They would take a log, and they would, make it into a bowl on the outside, and then they would carve out the center of it. It was usually elongated, so that you could put the flour out around the edges of it. And it was just huge. And you could, there's actually a guy on YouTube I've seen that makes pasta in it. And he has his big bread bowl, and he puts all of the eggs in it. And I don't know, I think it's like he's trying to, do some sort of world record or something. But he makes gigantic amounts of noodles. And you'll see 100 eggs in the middle of this bread bowl. And it looks really cool. But so bread bowls aren't just for decor. They were actually to be used. And it's very fulfilling to do it. So what you're looking for in this kneading is you're wanting it to become smooth and elastic. You want it to bounce back when you push on it. Now, fresh milled flour, I've found, at least in my experience, does not get as smooth as the store-bought flour. And so that may just be lack of education on my part. I've only been baking bread now with this for about 2 years with fresh milled dough, fresh milled flour. But that has been my experience. And I have not seen a great window pane with fresh milled as well. But I can knead it until I get bounce back on it. And when I bake it up, it gets nice and fluffy. It has a great crumb. It's very tender, and the kids love it. So that's my goal. And so this may not be a perfect loaf of bread, but it tastes good and it meets my family's needs. So if you guys have some experience with fresh milled flour and you have gotten the window pane effect specifically with sourdough, I'll need to do another recipe on sourdough because I bake that as well. But if you've gotten the window pane and you've gotten it super smooth, if you've gotten it very smooth, let me know what you attribute that to. So now I'm just gonna knead it on the counter. And the reason I'm doing this is that I'm not having to contend with the edges of the bowl now. And I probably could have done this sooner, but. So you see how it's breaking apart still? You really don't want that. And that means the gluten hasn't been developed yet. So you just need to keep kneading it until it is smooth and elastic and it's not breaking like that anymore. And I have so much to learn with this still, but I feel like I have some to pass along. I have some knowledge to pass along, which is why I'm making this video. It's to encourage you guys, if you've never done this before, to give it a try. It's therapeutic. You know you're getting good things, and it's also really empowering. What I like is that when we're out of bread, I don't feel beholden to going to the grocery store. It's like I have 4 kiddos and it's a big fiasco to get everybody ready and headed to anywhere outside the house. Well, not a fiasco, but it's a lot of work. So I'm gonna keep kneading this until it looks a little better. And it's starting to look better. That's starting to look good, but it needs a little bit more work. So I'll see you when it looks a little better. All of a sudden, it started looking different, and it's a lot smoother overall. One thing I did want to mention is just keep adding in a little bit of flour here and there as it gets sticky, and that will help your kneading process as well. You don't want it to be too sticky. And if you've never learned to knead, it's actually really easy. All you do is you use the palms of your hands, you push, you fold, and you turn. Push, fold, turn, push. Let's see, I actually push, turn, fold. It looks like push, fold, turn, push. I guess when I push down, I turn it. Push, turn, fold, push, turn, fold, push, turn. Okay guys, I'm gonna call this good, and part of the reason is when I push on it, it starts bouncing back. Not hugely, but it's bouncing back enough, and my arms are tired, so I'm just gonna make this into a nice ball with a little bit more kneading, and we're gonna, something I learned with my sourdough is you can just take your bowl and put it on top, and that keeps it from getting dried out. And I'm gonna set the timer for 45 minutes. I'm gonna check it. This calls for it to rise for an hour. That's using normal active yeast. This that I'm using is actually fast rising yeast, so it rises a little bit faster, but just check it periodically. Make sure that it doesn't go too far, because you don't want the yeast to over explode, I guess, because the yeast only has so much oomph in it. And so we have our first rise, we still have a second rise in the bread pan, and then we'll have the third rise in the oven. So just let it rise to double its size, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what to do next. What? Okay, so guess what I realized is that when I was making this, I didn't put any of the other dry ingredients in the flour. I'm tired today. So what I'm gonna do, remember what I was saying about part of your job as a baker or whatever is recovering or recouping when things don't go as you planned? So what I'm gonna do at this point, normally after it rises for an hour, you basically, spread it out and roll it up into a loaf, and then you're going to be rising it again. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and put these ingredients in it. I'm going to knead it a little bit more, and then I'm going to roll it up and put it in the bread pan. So we'll see if this affects the finished product. But when you are doing it, put all of the dry ingredients into the flour before you make your well and put your wet ingredients into it. Please don't touch it, your hands may not be clean. Okay, so we're going to put in 2 teaspoons of salt. That is really funny.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go ahead and spread this out so that it's easier to hopefully knead in equally, and please don't touch it. So here's 1 teaspoon. And what I might do is, we're gonna go ahead and put it in. I was gonna maybe knead it separately, but I think I'm gonna just knead it once. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and add in the rest of the dry ingredients. I'm just gonna push this out. I'm gonna throw them on top. I'm gonna knead it some more, and then I'm gonna turn it into the bread pan for the second rise. So the vitamin C powder is an interesting addition that I had never heard of before, and actually it extends the life of the bread. It keeps it from molding, which is awesome. I've already put the salt down. The Vita wheat gluten makes it nice, and let's see, how much do we put in there? Nice and puffy and soft. 1 teaspoon. Okay, so we'll do 1 teaspoon. We'll sprinkle this around. And you know, I've actually done this type of thing before with not forgetting the ingredients, although I've probably done that too. But with my sourdough recipe, one of the things you do is you knead in like a teaspoon of baking soda about a half hour before you bake it. So when the last rise, you knead in some baking soda, you throw it in the pan, you let it rise, and it helps with that lift a little bit if your sourdough isn't as poofy as you like it. So I've done this before in another way, and so I'm hoping it works. And you knead it 20 to 30 times, and then you know that it's probably pretty well kneaded or mixed in. Let's see, what else do we have? Sunflower lecithin. This stuff is expensive, but it's good for adding softness as well. And I get this from I think I got this from Amazon, actually, but I need more. It adds softness, and my kids like it, so we're gonna keep with this. These are all just kind of, the only one you absolutely have to do is the salt, probably. The rest of them are just kind of nice. So we have the vitamin C powder, the yeast, the gluten. Oh, did we do gluten? I don't think we did gluten yet. Did we do the gluten?
I think you did.
Vita wheat gluten. Yeah, we did that. And then the sunflower lecithin. Those are everything. Okay, and the salt. All right, so now we're just going to knead this a little bit and get that mixed in.
Would you usually do this even
No.
if you didn't?
Nope. Usually what we would be doing is just rolling it out and getting it into the bread pan. But because we, and I'll tell you at what point we would have been doing that. But because we had a glitch, and this will probably make the bread a little drier, unfortunately. But hey, that's what baking is all about, right? And I'll show you guys what it looks like when it comes out of the oven. So you get to see along with me how this experiment worked. Now, what we're gonna do, I incorporated all the dry ingredients that I forgot previously. And now what I'm doing is I'm just kind of mushing this into a semi-rectangle. It's more of an oval at this point. But what I'm doing is I'm gonna be rolling it. So I'm gonna make it as long as my bread pan, see? And then I'm gonna be rolling it like this. And to roll it into my loaf. So it's looking pretty good. And yesterday's loaf actually had a big bubble in it. And I think it was because I didn't roll it tight enough. I was just a little too hasty. I was just like, zoop, and that left that left a bubble in it. So you want it to be nice and tight. You want your roll to be nice and tight. And then after it's rolled up, and make sure your countertop is clean. Once it's rolled up, you're gonna pinch the seam. And then roll in the end and pinch that. Roll in the other end. Just make sure all the seams are pinched, because whatever seams are not pinched when you cook will actually bust open. So my loaf is not too even, which I'm a little disappointed about. But we'll put it in here, and actually a rise covers a multitude of sins. A lot of times it'll rise and it'll look absolutely fine. You're gonna let it rise until it's about double or even with the top of the bread pan, and then you'll go ahead and you'll put it into the oven. So we're gonna go ahead and cover this and just put it in a warm location. And you can cover it with a towel or whatever. I just cover it with press and seal because it stays so nicely on these non-stick pans. Oh, and I almost forgot. I don't even have to butter this pan because it's just such a great pan. But if you did need to butter your pan, which you do if it's not a really good non-stick pan, here's a little trick that my mother taught me. She was a home ec teacher. If you've ever seen any of my other videos, I talk about her occasionally. She's still living, but she's 80 now. But she was a home ec teacher back in the 70s, I guess, in Colorado. She taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade home economics. And so growing up, I got the result of that, which was a lot of education, which went in one ear and out the other, actually, at the time. But I think some of it has come back at this point. But one of her tricks is when you are needing to butter a pan, save your butter covers that have a little bit of butter on them and use that and just rub it in the pan. And that works really well, but I forgot and I don't need it in this pan anyway. So we're gonna set this to rise for another 30 minutes to an hour. Just watch it, and once it gets to the top of your bread pan, then we'll move on to the next step. So see you soon. Okay, so it's been about an hour. I might have let this overproof a little bit, which I tend to do because I get so distracted. But it's up about even with my bread pan. So we're gonna take this off carefully, and it's a little broken, which tells me I did not knead it long enough, even with all the kneading that I did. But I've heated the oven to 375, and I'm gonna throw this in here for about 25 to 30 minutes. And you can also use a thermometer. I have heard that bread is actually done at 190 degrees, like the internal temperature at 190 degrees. And so I've done that before, but it turns the bread really dark, and my family doesn't mind it being maybe a little bit not done and being a little lighter. So it's up to you how you want to do that. But in the meantime, this is going to be cooking for 25 minutes, and I'll show you what it looks like when it comes out. Okay, so my timer went off. It's been in there for about 30 minutes. And that's what the recipe said. And I like this brownness. I could leave it in there a little longer because it's probably not at 190 degrees right now, but I'm okay with that. The other thing I meant to mention is that there are other recipes that you can brush the top of the bread with butter before you put it in, and then it'll come out kind of glossy and it'll be really good. So this loaf is fine in that it will taste good. But as you can see with the modeling on the top, this is evidence that it was overrisen and it wasn't kneaded enough, but it's gonna taste fine. So it's a good learning lesson for everybody, right? I'm gonna let this cool off for a little bit, and then we will turn it out onto a rack to cool so that it's okay to cut. You probably need to cool it a good hour before you cut it, Many times we start cutting it after about 5 or 10 minutes, and it's very soft, but it tastes good. And there have been times that I've really needed it for lunch, which I actually do right now. And one of my tricks is that I'll throw it in the toaster and I'll toast up the slices to make sandwiches so they hold together better. And toasted tuna sandwiches are really good, so it works really well. So I really hope this tutorial has helped you, and we will post the recipe down below in the comments section, or in the description of the video section. And if you have any questions or would like to see more videos like this, let me know. I love baking, and part of that is going to be spilling out onto my channel, I'm sure. So I pray that you have a blessed day. Shalom. I turned out my bread, and I actually didn't even put it on a cooling board, but it did sit for about 10 minutes or so before I cut into it. As you're cutting it, if you need a whole lot of it, like I'm going to cut probably enough for 4 sandwiches. So I'm going to be about into the middle. Once we get into the middle, it might get a little soft, but for now, the outer edge, I already cut off the end. The outer edge is pretty good. A little trick, if it starts getting soft, turning it on its side helps it not collapse as easily. But the crumb of this is so beautiful, and it's soft just like you would get at the store. And always use grass-fed butter. Well, not grass-fed butter, but grass-fed cows who give you butter, because they give you the most nutrients, the most minerals. It's really good. I'm not eating a lot of bread right now because I'm trying to heal a tooth, but that is really, really good. And I would highly suggest that you give it a try. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to see them in the comment section. And come back. I'm going to be doing another video probably next week. I'll be releasing it next week when I make another round of my, the easiest pickles you will ever make. I've been so intimidated by pickles up until now. I made these a couple days ago, and they are good, and they are easy, and they are fast, which is the best part. So click the subscribe button and click the like so that you can see when we drop our video about the pickles, and we'd love to see what you think. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.